Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. We had somebody email me and they had asked if I could do a video on just the different saddle parts, like the terminology of the different parts of a saddle, of a Western saddle, and that way that could kind of clarify it in their mind, because there are some different names for certain parts of it. And so I thought, man, that'd be a really cool, quick video, so we're going to go ahead and do that now. First, what we're going to do is we're going to start with a tree. This is the framework or the base or foundation of what we build our saddles on. Every saddle has one of these in it, and they're made from different things. The ones I use are a wood tree covered in fiberglass, and that's what we use. It works best for the country where we're at with the humidity and the rainfall that we get and things like that. We're kind of getting close to swampy country. Rawhide is not the optimal material for our climate. If you're up in the mountains or you're out in the desert where it's nice and dry and all that, then rawhide's great. But down here, rawhide never stays dry, because we have water even in the air down here, 100% humidity. Rawhide just traditionally hasn't worked very well for us when our cowboys are swimming cattle and stuff to try to get them to higher ground during the rainy season. So if you're in Florida, Louisiana, South Texas, coastal Texas, Gulf Coast, stuff like that, I would probably advise sticking with a fiberglass tree. Just in my experience building saddles, that you know, that rawhide can weaken up and get really soppy and soft, and so I've even seen some really good trees that are covered in rawhide that the rawhide gets really soft if those guys are, unfortunately, you know, during a hurricane or something like that and swimming cattle for 2 weeks trying to move everything. It can really soften up and cause some issues as far as, you know, tree feeling broke or getting loose or something like that. And it's just the humidity in the air also can affect that rawhide, and I just think it's not the best material for our climate. So we go with fiberglass. Like I said, traditionally rawhide is going to be what most trees are covered with, and if you're in more of a drier climate, up in the mountains or in the desert or something like that, then it's fantastic, and I do love it from a traditional aspect and enjoy building on them. But for us, fiberglass works best. So that's what we use on the trees. As far as the tree goes, there's 5 parts normally, and that's your 2 bars, which are these 2 pieces here. That's what's actually going to touch the horse's back. This is where all your fitting happens. Nothing up here affects the fit of a horse on a saddle tree. It's all right here, okay, and in here. So this height can sometimes be an issue. Mainly, we're looking at this area here. That's at a whole nother video on fitting. But you got your 2 bars, you've got your cantle, and you've got your swell or your front. Down here, a lot of people call them a front or a swell. Some people up north call them a swell fork. This would be a swell fork tree versus an A fork tree or a wade tree. But we just call them the swells. That's when I'm talking to a client, it's the swells of the front end, kind of what swell pattern they want. And then you've got your horn. And so that would make the 5 pieces of a saddle tree. Our fiberglass trees do come with the 10 strainer already installed that ties and unifies all pieces of this tree, makes them one. I enjoy that because it kind of gets all that done so that it's all one piece. I don't have to add this in with a 10 strainer, which is traditional on a rawhide tree. You will have a complete opening in here. This will not be here, and so you'll be able to stick your hand through there basically, and you have to add in, when you do the ground seat, you add in a 10 strainer. And we do go on top of this with a complete leather ground seat to set the balance and the pitch and the seat of our saddles, but that's just kind of what we use. Now that's the tree. Now let's get started talking about just the different parts of a Western saddle, so you'll kind of be familiar with that. Alright, so I just grabbed one of our used roping saddles off the sales floor out there, so we can kind of use that for this demonstration. On a built saddle, you can see and tell some of the parts of the tree that are very easy to see, which would be the swells of the front end and the cantle. You really can't see the bars, so the bars are they're really covered, and that's why when a customer asks, you know, what's the bar frame, whatever, if I built the saddle, I usually remember what my gullet measurement, height, width, pitch, all that stuff, length of bar, crown of bar, rock of bar, and flare. I know all of those things. If it's a finished saddle, I have no clue what the bars are. I don't know the gullet measurement. I can guess and I can estimate, but there's skirts in the way, there's a lot of things in the way. So that makes it difficult to get to the bars for measuring purposes or fitting purposes. But as far as the swell and the cantle, you can pretty much see the shape and the width of the cantle, shape and width of the swells, the horn, all those parts of the tree are up and out of the saddle that you can still see even though they're covered. As far as the general parts of the saddle, again, this would be the front end or the swells of the saddle. This would be your seat, obviously, where you sit. This would be your cantle. I hear that a lot with customers. They'll call this part the cantle, And that kind of will confuse us in the store. If we're talking to a customer that's having an issue or they need a repair done and they're calling this the cantle, that can really throw us off because we're thinking back here and we're trying to assess their situation to see if we can help them. So that's one reason we want to do this video, just to kind of clarify what all the different parts are. And it's very common. A lot of people will call this the cantle and call this the seat, whatever. So we're just going to try to clean that up so we all know what we're talking about. You'll also hear some people that have had an English history or have had riding some Aussie saddles or something like that. They will call this the pommel. I've even had a few cowboys call it the pommel. I don't know where that came from, but that's really not traditional as far as for Western saddles. This would be a swell or a front in either swell fork or A fork, like we talked about earlier. So what we've got here as far as leather parts now is going to be your seat jockey. That's what this piece is here. This is actually, if it's a hard seated saddle, it's actually one piece. All this is one piece, and that's part of the seat. But this hang down part here that covers the top of your fender and covers your rigging, this area would be called the seat jockey. This would be called the back housing, or the rear jockey, is what some people will call it. There's a couple different names for this. We call them in the shop, we call them housings. So rear housings, that's just a term that I was taught when I was learning to build saddles. That's what we called it. So that's what I will usually use the term housing when I'm talking about this back part. All this piece of leather does is it covers the rigging that's underneath there and that kind of deal, and then that's all it does. It just covers that stuff there to make a nice line in the finished saddle. Not all saddles will have a housing. Some of them will be Mother Hubbard, as we call them, which means that this is actually a part of the skirt and all that is one piece. So there isn't a separate piece of leather here. There's a number of different things that you can do other than a housing or a rear jockey. But that's what that would be called. These down here, obviously these are the saddle skirts. They're the ones that have the sheepskin attached to them, and that would be the skirting or the saddle skirts. And then their purpose, of course, is to add a little bit more comfort between the bar and the horse with the sheepskin, stuff like that. But we've also got good padding now, so a lot of times that sheepskin isn't as good a shape as it should be, just because people normally won't spend the money to replace it. Then we come to the next main piece, which would be your stirrup leathers and fenders. Now this is all one unit, but it actually can be separated out as your fender, and this is your bigger, larger piece here that's on top. Sometimes your stirrup leathers will run up on the outside of the fender. That's just a style thing. It doesn't change anything. It doesn't make anything better or worse. It's just a style. But this would be a fender. Down in Texas, you will hear guys call these sweat leathers. And that's just something that's a term that I've heard all my life, but that's what guys will call these, as sweat leathers, and or even sweat fenders. I heard a guy say one time, but basically it's a saddle fender is what this is. And then on the inside of that fender is attached your stirrup leathers. And so those would be the straps or the straight cuts in either 3-inch or 2.5 inch with your buckle adjustment there. Now these can either be half or full stirrup leathers, but that's a whole nother deal. But yes, those would be a separate piece. So when you're going in for repair, as we did on this saddle, we replaced the stirrup leathers and buckles. That's all brand new, but we use the old saddle fenders. And that's because they can usually be patched, they can be cleaned up. They usually they take a beating, but they don't usually get the stress on them that the actual stirrup leather gets with the hardware and stuff in the way. As we go further in, now we have the rigging. Now this, you can go online and you can research a lot of different rigging styles. There's a bunch of different ways to do this. Being in Texas, this is a more traditional, what we call a full double D rigging. So you've got 4 D rings, so 2 on this side, 2 on the other side, the same placement at full position basically. I set mine a tick off of full towards the 7/8 position, not nowhere near 7/8, but a tick back, just because I think that works better for us and our horses that we're dealing with. But this is still called a full double D rigging. And that's going to be very common in Texas, especially South Texas, coming up to Central Texas and East Texas. You get out towards West Texas in the Panhandle, you'll see more in-skirt rigs, which will be where the rigging plate, either a round ring or a flange plate, will be built into the skirt, or a flat plate, which is basically the same type of hardware, but in a separate piece that actually comes and attaches in here. But for us, the full double rigging is most common here. People are most comfortable with that, so that's what we stick with. Other areas of the country, their riggings, you know, like I said, most of the country you'll see a lot of plate rigs and a lot of inskirt rigs. But for us down here, it just seems that's what most guys want, is just they're used to that, they've seen that. Unfortunately, just from seeing poor craftsmanship on an inskirt rig somewhere where they have ripped out or something like that. And but that's the rigging underneath there. And then as far as what we talk about here, these are what we call our rig catchers. That's what I call them, rig catchers. Some people just call them catchers. But there's this one here, usually on the onside, will have a 2-inch slot right here in this, and that's for your latigo tail. When you cinch up and get ready to ride, you can take your tail of your latigo and just loop it down through there, and that'll keep it secure, and so that it doesn't create a lot of bulk under here. You'll see like bronc riders and some guys will tie this in like a little necktie type of deal. That creates a lot of bulk right there in front of your leg. So it's better just kind of cinch up, buckle in, and then drop your tail right through here. On the other side, you'll have another one, but it looks a little smaller. It's a little narrower, and that catcher there has a vertical slot in it, and that's for hanging your rigging. So as far as like your girt and your flank girt, when you unsaddle your horse, you can pick those two, both your cinches up, buckle them together, and buckle it right there, and it keeps your girts up nice and high to where you're not, you know, dragging them through the dirt and everything else, getting sticker burrs in it. Also, you don't want to take and just flip them over the seat, and a lot of people do, but you want to just be careful that you're not like bending stuff up. I'm very particular about how saddles set on a rack in a saddle house, because they may set there for quite some time without being used, and so I don't want certain things like, you know, throw my girts up there and then they end up doing this to my seat. Then if I come back 2 or 3 weeks later and pull the girts down, my seat looks like this on my saddle, and I don't like that. I want it down where it's supposed to be, and so I want everything to lay nicely. So I prefer to use my rig catcher, or if you're going to put your saddle up for a while, take your girts off and you don't have to worry about it. Then here on the saddle, coming all the way around, this would be your rear billet, or your flank billet, some people call this. We just call them rear billets or flank billets. Those are for your flank strap, obviously, right here. This is just hanging out here, but you would connect your flank cinch. And then on the front, this saddle doesn't have the latigos and stuff, but you'll have an off billet, which I just call the off billet is for the front. The flank billet is the same on both sides. But on the front, you have an off billet, and then your latigo tie strap. That's the one that you cinch up with when you're saddling your horse. And the off billet is the one that actually connects your girt to the saddle, and that one you very rarely, once you get it adjusted, you hardly ever use it. But there are a few different types. There's a fold over, there's a half breed, there's a couple different types of way to connect this. That's just a personal preference. But those are the billets and stuff. Now, as we get to the cantle, this cantle here, the inside of this seat is called the dish. And so that comes down to the tree, the way the tree was built, how much dish they added in there. But that would be the dish. For us, the area that we look at right here, this would be what we call the pocket. This is where the rider rides. They do not ride in the dish. So the dish is not that critical to me. I want a certain amount of dish, but I'm not really critical, because the rider is not riding here. This is not where you ride. This pocket right here is where a person rides. And so that is the pocket of the ground seat, and that's what we're usually focused on. Then if we come up on top, this piece here is what we call the cantle binder. And the cantle binder is what ties in the cantle back, which is what this piece back here is the back of the cantle. It ties that leather and the seat leather, and then you stitch all that, and that ties all that in together to where that's not going to come off. Now you can have it rolled over like this, or you can have it straight up, like some guys will call that a high back, or they'll call that a pencil roll, something like that. That's just straight up. It's doing the exact same thing. It's a personal preference. It doesn't matter which way you go. This way here is called a Cheyenne roll, and that's pretty common to hear that. So if you hear somebody say, I want a Cheyenne roll, that's what they're talking about. They want this roll. Now this we can cut in any width, so we can do a 1-inch Cheyenne roll to like a 2.5, 3-inch Cheyenne roll if they want to. Or you can do a buckaroo roll, which would just be straight up. And then inside the seat of a built saddle, normally you will have a hole right here in front of the seat. That is called the handhold. And the handhold is there for the bulk of the build of the saddle once the ground seat is done. And the reason for that is to pick up your saddle. That's really the main reason that that hole is there, is to be able to pick up your saddle and take it wherever you're going. Take it off your horse, you carry it to the trailer, whatever you want to do. It also makes a handy spot to stick your beer if you're riding somewhere and need a beverage to sit right there. Sometimes you can stick it in there. And then, of course, we have the horn, which, like I said, it's pretty self-explanatory. You've got a cap and undercover and then your wrap on your horn. Most people will just call, if they're calling for repair, just say, my horn's messed up, I ripped my horn off, my horn's broke, whatever. And you're going to have to replace all those pieces anyway, usually, if you're getting down to that. Real quick, back to the Fenders stirrup leathers. These are pretty self-explanatory, but they're stirrups. But yes, the stirrups are many different shapes and styles and sizes and looks and designs. Those are not crucial. They're a complete personal preference to the rider on what they want to ride, from oxbows to 6-inch bell stirrups. It's whatever the customer wants there is the stirrups that we put on them. We don't really have an opinion on that. And real quick, that's about all the parts of the saddle. So like I said, I'll do a quick run through with them right now. Just again, we've got our seat jockey, which is the part that hangs down on our full seat. We've got our rear jockey, or our housing, our back housing, that's what I call them. And we've got our skirts. Then underneath all of that, we've got our rigging. And this would be a full double rigging, full double D ring rigging. So you would either have a flat plate rig or an inskirt rig or a full double D rig or a Samstag rig. There's all kinds of riggings. Like I said, get online, you can find all kinds of stuff on rigging. But this would be a full double D rigging. That's going to be under the seat jockey and the back housing or rear jockey. Then we have the fenders and stirrup leathers, which you can kind of break out independently to stirrup leathers and fenders, also known in Texas sometimes as sweat leathers. And then attached to them you have the stirrups. On top you've got the swells, or the front with your saddle horn, obviously. Your cantle is your seat, the back of the seat, and it either has a Cheyenne roll or a buckaroo roll. And then on the front you have your catchers or rig catchers here. And then saddles can have either saddle strings, they can have tapaderos, they can have saddle bags, they can have plier scabbards. You can do a lot of attachments on that, and that's probably a whole nother video. Real quick, if you're wanting to size your saddle, this is a good point to do that. If you want to see what seat size you ride, then put your measuring tape, just get you a good old little measuring tape or ruler or something, and put it in right at the base of the horn. I like to come right here at the base, not up on the neck of the horn, not down here in the handhold, but right there at the base as that horn, begins to go down right there. Measure from right there to the top edge of your cantle, just on the inside, okay? It's going to give you a spacing, and this is a 14-inch dead-on tree. And so that's going to tell us that this is a 14-inch seat, somebody asked. I know English saddles measure differently, but basically that's how you measure a Western saddle. You will sometimes be in a saddle shop somewhere and you'll see older gentlemen go up to a saddle and do this. What he's doing is he's sizing that saddle to see if it's his size. The guy that taught me how to build saddles, he taught me about that, and basically the way he explained it is if you make a fist and bend your elbow and keep your wrist in line, don't do this, keep it straight and bend your elbow. The length from the end of your fist to the end of your elbow is the same length as the femur bone in your leg. And that's what that what actually corresponds for your seat size, because that's what we're actually allowing for. We're allowing for enough space between this and this with the seat size so that your leg can fit here. The seat size technically has nothing to do with your posterior. It has everything to do with your height and your leg length. Now obviously if a man is 4'1" and weighs 465 pounds, he's not going to ride a 14-inch seat or a 13.5-inch seat. But within reason, that is what we go off of, is by the femur bone of the leg. We're trying to get leg placement here. And then that's just a rule of thumb. If a man wants to ride a tight seat, like most ropers do, then that's his preference. That's what he's going for. He's trying to complete a particular objective. If a guy wants to ride a bigger seat, he really needs a 15, but he likes riding 16.5s. Again, he's trying to perform a particular objective. That's his prerogative. But it's a good rule of thumb or a benchmark to know what seat size you are. So usually when customers are in the store, I'll have them make a fist bend their elbow, and I'll measure from here to here, and that'll tell me what seat size they need to be riding. That's just because it's a lot less weird than me measuring their femur bone. in the shop. What we do is we just measure that. So that's why you'll see some old timers put their elbow inside the seat of the saddle, and then if their fist slides behind the swell like that, they know that seat is pretty close for them. So if I walk up to this saddle is way too small for me. It's a 14-inch. You know, I mean, I could ride it, but it's way too small for me. So this would be a saddle that I wouldn't even bother asking about or anything else. And he had told me that, and I never really, you know, I thought, well, that's kind of cool. It's kind of nostalgic, you know. It's an old way of looking at saddles, you know. And sure enough, it wasn't probably 2 months later, there was an older gentleman in the store, and he was walking around, and I saw him do that a few times. So that's a very common thing. I don't know if it's common up north or in other areas of the country, but in Texas, I have seen it in a shop. So it is something that wasn't just something him pulling my leg. But that is how we kind of go off of that. Again, that's just a good rule of thumb. If you're riding cutting horses, you're going to ride way bigger than the seat size you'll measure for. If you're going to rope calves, you're probably going to ride a lot smaller seat than what you would measure for. So that's just kind of a rule of thumb. But that's the video. I hope that helped. Like I said, it's just to get the terminology right. People call things a lot of different things. In fact, for the buckaroo roll, for the straight up cantle, I've had people call that a turkey tail here in Texas. I've never heard that before in 17 years, 16 years building saddles. I've never heard anybody call that a turkey tail. But it's getting more common. Over the last couple of years, I've heard quite a few call it that. I don't know where that came from, but anyway, people have different names for different things. We just want to be sure that we have the terminology kind of close so that if somebody calls us, we're not working on this end of the saddle and they're describing this end of the saddle. So maybe that'll help you. I hope that answers some of the questions people have had out there as far as what some of these parts are called. There is a lot of good resources online about saddle parts and, you know, saddle repair and different things. So be sure to check that out. And I appreciate you guys, and we'll see you in the next little tip video.